He thought his death would settle the debt to the dark ritual. Instead, it was the beginning of an eternal sentence, cursed to wander between worlds, forever guarding the wealth he could never take, forced to witness the suffering of everyone he ever loved.
The sprawling modern villa on the outskirts of Jakarta stood as a cold, marble-clad monument to a success story no one could quite explain. It was the home of Arman Wijaya, a man who had risen from a penniless orphan to a real estate tycoon in an impossibly short decade. Tonight's party, celebrating his latest corporate acquisition, was a spectacle of sensory overload. Laser lights cut through the humid air, bouncing off sequined dresses and the polished surfaces of luxury sports cars parked valet on the immaculate lawn. The thumping bass of a hired DJ vibrated through the floorboards, a stark contrast to the traditional Javanese melodies that sometimes seemed to whisper from the very soil the villa was built upon. Waiters in crisp white uniforms wove through the throng of socialites, politicians, and business rivals, all vying for a moment of the host's time. Arman stood at the center of it all, a king holding court, his smile a perfectly crafted mask of congeniality that never quite managed to warm his perpetually calculating eyes. He moved through the crowd with practiced ease, clasping hands and exchanging hollow pleasantries, but his attention was subtly divided. Every so often, his gaze would flicker towards the ancient, gnarled banyan tree that stood at the far edge of the property, a relic the landscapers had been forbidden to touch. He accepted a fresh glass of champagne from a passing tray, but barely sipped it, his focus inward. Spotting his young nephew, Rendra, looking slightly overwhelmed near the dessert table, Arman navigated the crowd and clapped a firm hand on the boy's shoulder. "All of this," he said, his voice a low rumble that cut through the music, "will be yours to command one day, boy. Remember, true wealth isn't just numbers in an account. It is the power to shape realities, to demand respect from a world that once offered you nothing. It is a legacy built on unshakable foundations." His words carried a weight that felt heavier than mere business advice. Long after the last drunken guest had been ushered into their luxury car and the last of the staff had cleaned up, the mansion was plunged into a silence that felt dense and oppressive. The vibrant energy of the party had vanished, replaced by a watchful stillness. Upstairs, in his minimalist bedroom, Rendra tossed and turned, his mind racing with images of glamour and his uncle's intense, unsettling words. Meanwhile, Arman, still in his rumpled tuxedo, moved with a different purpose. He bypassed his opulent master suite and descended a narrow, hidden staircase that led not to a wine cellar, but to the raw, concrete underbelly of the house. The basement. The temperature dropped sharply with each step, the air growing thick with the smell of damp earth and something else, something metallic and old. The basement was a void, a stark contrast to the glittering world above. The only light came from a single flickering black candle set on the floor. In its shaky glow, the concrete floor revealed itself to be etched with intricate spiraling patterns and faint Javanese script almost worn away by time. In the very center of this hidden ritual space, a small unglazed kendi, clay pot, sat on a faded red cloth. Arman knelt before it, his shoulders slumping, the facade of the powerful tycoon completely crumbling away. His hands trembled as he lit bundles of strange, fragrant herbs, the smoke curling in unnerving patterns that seemed to defy the stagnant air. He began to whisper, his voice a desperate, rasping plea in the ancient language of his ancestors. I offer my gratitude for the bounty. I acknowledge the debt. The terms are remembered. Please, I need just a little more time. The boy is not yet ready. The lineage must be secured." Rendra, jerked from a fitful sleep by a nightmare he couldn't remember, found himself drawn by an inexplicable curiosity. He crept from his room, the marble floor icy under his bare feet, and heard the faint, rhythmic murmur coming from below. He followed the sound, finding the usually locked basement door slightly ajar. He pressed his eye to the crack, his heart hammering against his ribs. He saw his uncle kneeling, but the shadows in the room seemed alive. They coalesced into gaunt, distorted figures that stood in a silent circle around Arman, their forms shifting and shimmering in the candlelight. A wave of nauseating dread, a primal fear that screamed at him to run, froze him in place. He stumbled back, his elbow knocking against the wall with a soft thud. The whispering in the basement ceased instantly. The ensuing silence was more terrifying than the chant. The next morning, the housekeeper's scream echoed through the villa. Arman Wijaya was found cold and lifeless in his study, a look of sheer terror etched onto his face. The official cause was declared a sudden, massive heart attack. But Rendra knew, with a chilling certainty, the debt had finally been called due. The reading of the will was held in the stark, air-conditioned office of Arman's lawyer, a room that smelled of lemon polish and expensive paper. Rendra sat stiffly in a leather chair, flanked by his Aunt Sari, whose grief had curdled into a seething, silent fury. The lawyer, a man with a perpetually neutral expression, read the dry legal language that detailed the vastness of Arman's empire. Holding companies, real estate portfolios, offshore accounts, and the crown jewel, the villa itself. When the lawyer finally announced that everything, without exception, was bequeathed solely to Rendra, the air left the room. Sari shot up from her seat, her chair screeching against the polished floor. "This is an outrage," she hissed, her voice trembling with a decade of repressed resentment. "I am his blood sister. I cared for him when he had nothing. And he leaves it all to a boy? What about my rights? What about my life?" Her accusations hung in the air, met only with the lawyer's calm reiteration of the document's legality. Beyond the single stipulation about the basement, a separate, sealed letter was handed to Rendra. Once alone in the hallway, his hands shaking, he broke the wax seal. The handwriting inside was Arman's, but it was frantic, jagged, as if written under immense duress. "Rendra, if you are reading this, I have failed. The wealth you inherit is not a gift. It is a custodianship. It belongs to the earth, and we are merely its temporary keepers. The power is real, but the price is eternal. Do not be tempted. Do not seek it out. The guardian in the basement, it must be appeased, not awakened. Sell everything if you can. Leave and never look back. Forgive me." The words were a cold wave of dread, confirming the horrific spectacle he had witnessed. But intertwined with the fear was a flicker of something else, a morbid, terrifying curiosity. What kind of power could inspire such devotion and such terror? Moving into the villa felt like walking into a gilded tomb. The sheer scale of the empty house was overwhelming. Sunlight streamed through the massive windows, illuminating dancing dust motes, and yet it failed to warm the rooms. Every echo of his footstep on the marble sounded like an intrusion. He spent his first day aimlessly wandering the halls, running his fingers over expensive art and furniture that felt utterly disconnected from the man he thought he knew. His aunt's words echoed in his mind, seeding doubt and guilt. Was I worthy? Was this all a mistake? That night he ordered takeaway and ate alone at the vast dining table that could seat 20, the clatter of his plastic container absurdly loud in the silence. He tried to watch television in the screening room, but the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to twitch and move when he wasn't looking directly at them. Sleep was a futile pursuit. He lay in the guest bedroom. He couldn't bring himself to use Arman's room, staring at the ceiling, his mind replaying the funeral, the will, the letter. The house settled around him, its creaks and groans sounding unnaturally deliberate. Then it began. A faint, rhythmic screeping. It was low at first, a sound that could be mistaken for a tree branch against a window. But it grew steadily louder, more insistent. It was metallic and gritty, the sound of something heavy being dragged slowly, agonizingly across the rough concrete floor of the basement directly below him. He sat bolt upright, his blood running cold. He held his breath, listening. The scraping stopped. For a moment, there was only the frantic pounding of his own heart. Then it started again, this time accompanied by a low, shuddering sigh that seemed to seep up through the floorboards and vibrate through the frame of the bed. Driven by a mix of terror and a desperate need to prove it was just the house, he swung his legs out of bed. His heart was a drum against his ribs. He grabbed a heavy bronze bookend from a shelf, wielding it like a makeshift weapon. He crept out into the dark hallway, the marble floor freezing his feet. The sound was clearer here, an unmistakable drag and scrape coming from the end of the hall where the basement door stood. He inched closer, each step an act of sheer will. The air grew colder the nearer he got. He reached out a trembling hand, his fingers just inches from the doorknob, when a voice, dry as dust and ancient, whispered directly into his ear from behind him. "The master is gone. Who will pay the debt?" Rendra spun around, swinging the bookend at empty air. The hallway was deserted. The scraping in the basement ceased instantly, replaced by a soft, faint tapping from inside the kendi itself, as if something was trying to get out. He fled back to his room, locking the door and barricading himself behind a chair, knowing with absolute certainty that his inheritance was alive, and it knew his name. The next morning, sunlight streamed into the villa, painting the marble floors in warm, cheerful patterns. It felt like a cruel joke. The terror of the night before, the whispering voice, and the horrific scraping felt like a distant nightmare in the clean, rational light of day. Rendra moved through the vast rooms in a daze, his lack of sleep making everything feel slightly unreal. He made coffee in the sprawling, stainless steel kitchen, the normalcy of the act a stark contrast to the surreal horror that had gripped him just hours earlier. He tried to convince himself it was stress, grief, the overwhelming weight of his new circumstances, a psychological break. But the memory of that voice, dry and specific, echoed in his mind. The master is gone. Who will pay the debt? It was too real, too pointed to be his imagination. He couldn't face the basement door. Instead, he retreated to Arman's study, a room he had previously avoided. It was a space of cold order, floor-to-ceiling shelves of untouched legal and business texts, a massive teak desk, and a single framed black-and-white photo of a much younger Arman standing before a vast, empty plot of land, the very land the villa now occupied. Rendra sat in the high-backed leather chair, the scent of his uncle's cologne still faintly clinging to it. He booted up the desktop computer, its glow of familiar comfort. His mission was clear. He needed to understand. He began a frantic, desperate digital excavation, searching for any clue about Ilmu Bumi, Pesugihan, Earth Spirit Debt, and the rituals his uncle might have performed. The internet offered a chaotic mix of superstitious forum posts, sensationalized news articles about sudden wealth and tragic ends, and dry anthropological texts. It was overwhelming and ultimately unhelpful. Folklore and fear, nothing concrete. Frustration mounting, Rendra turned his attention to the physical world of the study. He started a methodical search, pulling open drawers filled with mundane office supplies and corporate paperwork. It was in the bottom right drawer, hidden beneath a false panel he almost missed, that he found it. A small, cloth-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. The handwriting inside was Arman's, but from years ago, neater, yet filled with a hungry intensity. It wasn't a diary of business deals, but a log of desperation. Entries detailed his early failures, his mounting debts, his humiliation. Then the tone shifted. He wrote about a meeting with an old dukun, a shaman in a remote village in central Java. A man who spoke of a pact not with a demon, but with the spirit of the earth itself. A spirit that demanded stewardship, not worship, and offered abundance in return for an ultimate, terrible price. The journal described the initial rituals, the feeling of the earth's energy flowing into him, and his first business successes, which he called harvests. The most chilling entry was the last one, dated just a week before his death. The writing was frantic, the ink blotted in places. The signs are here. The guardian grows restless. The soil around the villa's foundation has turned black and cold. Nothing will grow. The sounds at night. It is checking the boundaries. The final payment is due upon my death, not just my life, but my eternal service. I am to become a Gentayangan, a guardian of the wealth I cultivated, trapped between worlds, unable to move on, forced to ensure the pact continues through my bloodline. Rendra must not be drawn in. He must not inherit the duty. I have to find a way to break the cycle. Rendra dropped the journal as if he had burned him. His uncle wasn't just a victim. He was a future warning. The horror wasn't just about haunted sounds. It was about a metaphysical inheritance of an unimaginable prison sentence. His hands trembling, he grabbed his phone. He needed an expert, someone who could separate superstition from spiritual reality. After more searching, he found the contact information for Dr. Alia Sari, a cultural anthropologist at the University of Indonesia who had published papers on indigenous Javanese belief systems. He called, expecting a voicemail. To his surprise, she answered. He stumbled through an explanation, mentioning his uncle's name, the villa, and speaking in vague terms about unusual occurrences and family rituals. There was a long silence on the other end. When Dr. Alia spoke again, her voice, previously professional and curious, was now laced with a grave seriousness. Arman Wijaya, listen to me. Do not engage with whatever is in that house. Do not try to understand it on your own. What you're describing, it aligns with the oldest, most severe forms of earthly pacts. I am in Jakarta. I can be there in 2 hours. Do not touch anything. Do not go into the basement. Just wait. The call ended, and Rendra was left alone in the silent study, the scholar's urgent warning making the daylight itself feel threatening. The nightmare was confirmed. It was real, and it was far worse than he could have ever imagined.
The 2 hours waiting for Dr. Alia were an exercise in agonizing tension. Every creak of the house settling, every hum of the refrigerator sounded like a prelude to the scraping and whispering returning. Rendra paced the length of the grand living room, his eyes constantly darting towards the windows and the front door, simultaneously dreading and desperately hoping for the anthropologist's arrival. He stayed away from the study, away from the journal whose words were now burned into his mind. Gentayangan, guardian of the wealth. The phrases looped in his head, transforming his uncle's opulent villa from a symbol of success into a gilded, metaphysical prison whose warden was yet to be appointed. Right on time, a modest sedan pulled up the sweeping driveway, a stark contrast to the luxury vehicles from the party. Dr. Alia Sari was a woman in her late 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing and a demeanor of calm authority. She carried a worn leather satchel instead of a briefcase. Rendra ushered her in quickly,
and her first action was not a greeting, but a pause just inside the threshold. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath as if tasting the air. "There's a silence here that is heavy," she remarked, her voice low. "It's not empty, it's watchful." She declined his offer of coffee and got straight to work, pulling a digital voice recorder and a notepad from her bag. Start from the beginning. Leave nothing out, no matter how trivial or insane it may seem. Rendra led her to the study and handed her the journal. As she read, her expression grew increasingly grim. She asked precise, probing questions about the sounds, the voice, the location of the ritual space. She didn't flinch at the descriptions, she treated them as data, which was both reassuring and terrifying. "The Kendi is the focal point," she explained, her tone clinical. "It's not a spirit itself, but a vessel, a conduit and an anchor. The rituals performed around it create a tether between the practitioner and the elemental consciousness of the land, what some traditions call a Gentayangan. The wealth is a byproduct of this alignment, but the energy is not a gift. It is a loan, and the collateral is the practitioner's very essence upon death." Her investigation then moved beyond the study. She asked to see the exterior of the house, specifically the foundation. They walked the perimeter, and Dr. Alia's calm professionalism finally cracked. Where the soil met the villa's white walls, it was indeed blackened, barren, and compacted as if starved of life. She knelt, scooping up a handful. It was unnaturally cold and crumbled into a fine, ash-like powder between her fingers. "This is not good," she whispered, more to herself than to Rendra. "The land is sick. It has been fed ambition but starved of respect. The balance is broken." Her worst discovery was near the ancient banyan tree at the property's edge. Partially hidden by roots was a small, decaying shrine, a few weathered stones and a shattered clay plate. "A propitiatory shrine to the local spirit of the place," she said, her voice thick with dismay. "It's been deliberately desecrated, ignored. This wasn't just a pact, it was a hostile takeover. Your uncle didn't just borrow power, he tried to command it." They returned to the study, the mood now profoundly somber. Dr. Alia looked at Rendra with a new, piercing intensity. The journal mentions breaking the cycle. He knew the fate that awaited him. A Gentayangan is not a ghost that haunts a place. It is a soul bound to a function. Its consciousness is stripped away, replaced by a single driving purpose: to protect the flow of wealth and ensure the pact is passed on, usually to a blood relative. It becomes a slave to the very energy it sought to control. The academic had vanished, replaced by a woman delivering a dire warning. The theoretical had become terrifyingly real. Dr. Alia's words hung in the study's air, thick and suffocating. The theoretical horror of a haunted house had crystallized into the precise, monstrous reality of a spiritual inheritance, a CEO position in hell. Rendra felt the walls of the villa, once symbols of immense luxury, closing in on him. Each marble slab a tombstone in the mausoleum his uncle had built. "What do I do?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper, stripped of all pretense. "How do I break it?" Dr. Alia sighed, the weight of her knowledge evident in the slump of her shoulders. "It is not a lock with a key," she said gravely. "It is a living, breathing covenant with the land itself. To break it, you must not just reject the wealth, you must actively dismantle the flow of energy and sever the tether. The first step is the Kendi. It is the anchor. It must be deconsecrated." She detailed a process that sounded like a reverse exorcism. It required specific items: fresh, unpolluted spring water from a sacred source, white flowers that had never borne fruit, and a specific type of resin incense meant for purification, not summoning. These are not just symbols, they are counterweights. The energy your uncle used was about taking, commanding, and binding. This is about releasing, cleansing, and returning. The intent behind every action is paramount, Any trace of fear, greed, or doubt could be exploited. She wrote down a list and the name of a specific toko mystique in an old part of the city that might carry what they needed. "I must go to the university archives," she said. "There are older texts, specific mantras for dissolution, not just protection. I will return before nightfall. Do not, under any circumstance, attempt to go near the basement before then. The entity is aware of our presence. It will be vigilant." The drive to the Chinatown district was a surreal journey from one world to another. The wide, orderly avenues around the villa gave way to narrow, chaotic streets teeming with life. The toko mystique was tucked between a noodle shop and a fabric store, its entrance shrouded by beads and the faint, permanent scent of sandalwood and cloves. Inside, glass cases were filled with an array of talismans, roots, and jars of unidentifiable substances. An elderly Chinese-Indonesian woman with eyes that seemed to see everything at once listened to Rendra's halting request for the items on the list. She asked no questions, but her gaze intensified when he mentioned the white flowers for pelepasan, or release. She gathered the items silently, her movements economical and precise. As she handed him the bag, she placed a small additional pouch in his hand. "Salt," she said, her voice raspy. "Circle yourself before you sleep. It is not much, but it is a fence. The thing in your house, it is very old and very hungry." Her words sent a fresh chill down his spine. She knew. Returning to the villa felt like walking back into a cage. The silence that greeted him was different now, deeper, more resentful. He could feel a palpable sense of observation, a cold attention focused on the bag he carried. He placed the items on the kitchen counter, the mundane setting making them look absurd. Following the old woman's advice, he took the pouch of salt and, feeling a fool, but too terrified not to, poured a thin, continuous line across the threshold of his bedroom door and along the windowsill. It was a child's defense against a monster, but it was all he had. As the afternoon sun began to wane, casting long, distorted shadows through the vast windows, a new sound began. It started as a low, subterranean rumble, like stone grinding against stone. Then came the scratching. It was no longer the metallic drag of chains. This was different, sharper, more frantic. It was the sound of countless claws scraping and scrabbling against the other side of the basement door, as if a horde of creatures was trying to dig its way out. The heavy wooden door shuddered in its frame. The polite, haunting whispers of the previous night were gone, replaced by a cacophony of distorted, overlapping voices that hissed and snarled, rising in a wave of pure, undiluted malice. The salt line at his door seemed pitifully inadequate. The guardian knew they were planning an eviction, and it was no longer just checking the boundaries. It was declaring war. Dr. Alia's return couldn't come too soon. The cacophony from the basement was no longer a haunting. It was a siege. The frantic scratching of countless invisible claws against the door was a sound of pure, mindless urgency, a swarm trying to breach its confines. The distorted, snarling voices layered over each other, a chorus of rage that vibrated through the floorboards and up into Rendra's bones. He backed away from his bedroom door, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The thin white line of salt on the floor suddenly looked like the most pathetic defense imaginable against the primordial fury shaking the house. A cold that had nothing to do with the air conditioning began to seep out from under the basement door, spreading down the hallway like an invisible tide, carrying with it the smell of wet earth and ozone. Dr. Ulya's sedan screeched to a halt in the driveway just as the lights in the villa began to flicker violently. Rendra threw the front door open before she could even knock. Her face, previously a mask of academic calm, was now pale and tight with alarm. She heard the snarling and the scratching, her eyes widening. "It knows," she said, her voice sharp. "It knows our intent. The cleansing ritual is a direct threat to its existence." She dropped her leather satchel on the floor and pulled out a larger, cloth-wrapped bundle from within it. Unfolding it, she revealed several older-looking items: a small handheld bell made of a dull, dark metal, a woven bracelet of rust-colored threads, and a pouch of what looked like mixed seeds and herbs. "We cannot wait. We must act now before its influence grows stronger with the deepening night." They retreated to the kitchen, the room farthest from the basement, the bag of supplies from the Toko mystic between them on the counter. The electric lights continued to stutter, plunging the room into moments of near darkness filled with the ever louder sounds of the entity's rage. Dr. Ulia worked with a frantic but precise energy. She instructed Rendra to fill a ceramic bowl with the spring water. She then began to crush the white flowers, murmuring a low, steady mantra in ancient Javanese, their petals releasing a faint, sweet scent that seems to push back against the creeping odor of decay. "The intent, Rendra," she reminded him, her voice strained. "Focus not on your fear, but on release, on returning what was taken. Imagine the land healing." Suddenly, all the lights in the house died at once. The humming of the appliances ceased, leaving only the terrifying symphony of the basement entity, which now seemed deafening in the absolute dark. A wave of freezing air washed through the kitchen, making them gasp. From the blackness of the hallway, a new sound emerged, a slow, wet, dragging sound, accompanied by a labored, rattling breath. It was coming towards them. Dr. Ulia's hand shot out, fumbling in her bag. She pulled out a long beeswax candle and lit it with a trembling match. The small flame cast a shaky globe of light, pushing the darkness back just a few feet, but it was enough to see the thing coalescing at the kitchen entrance. It was not Arman. It was a horrifying amalgamation of earth and memory. It had his general shape, but it was composed of blackened, shifting soil, tangled roots, and shattered fragments of the villa's own foundation stones. Its face was a swirling vortex of dark earth, but from within it, glimpses of Arman's terrified expression would flash for a split second before being swallowed again by the mud. It dragged one leg, a limb made of compacted, cold clay, which made that wet scraping sound on the marble floor. It raised a crumbling earthen arm, pointing a finger of stone and root at Rendra. The snarling voices unified into a single gut-wrenching command that echoed not in the air, but inside their very skulls. "Accept the duty." Rendra stood frozen, paralyzed by a terror so complete it felt like death. Dr. Ulia, however, reacted. She snatched the bowl of spring water and crushed flowers. She did not throw it at the entity. Instead, she stepped forward, her voice rising into a powerful, commanding chant, and she flung the water in a wide arc, creating a barrier between them and the creature. The water hit the marble floor with a hiss, and for a moment the entity recoiled, a wave of steam rising from the ground where the water had landed. The thing that was once Arman let out a roar of pure frustration that shook the very foundations of the house. The candle flame guttered wildly. The first assault had been halted, but the war was far from over. The Guardian was inside the house. The thing that had been Arman Wijaya recoiled from the cleansed water, a wave of pure fury emanating from its shifting earthen form. The steam rising from the floor where the water had landed carried the faint, sweet scent of the flowers, a stark and offensive contrast to the grave cold stench of the entity. The rattling breath hitched, and the snarling voices subsided into a low, continuous growl that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Dr. Aulia stood her ground, the beeswax candle held high in one trembling hand, the now empty ceramic bowl in the other. Her chanting shifted from a protective mantra to one of banishment, her voice a steady, defiant thread against the overwhelming dread. The entity did not advance, but it did not retreat either. It seemed to be studying them, its head, a swirling mass of dark soil and fragmented stone, tilting. The glimpses of Arman's face within the vortex were more frequent now, each one a snapshot of utter agony and despair, a silent scream frozen in time. The labored, dragging breath continued, a horrifying sound that filled the absolute darkness of the powerless villa. Then the voices spoke again, not as a unified command, but in a twisted, multi-layered chorus that was a whisper and a roar. The bloodline must continue. The pact must be fed. The words were less an attack than a statement of absolute, inflexible law, as immutable as gravity. Rendra, still paralyzed against the kitchen counter, felt a new sensation cut through his terror. It wasn't a sound or a sight, but a pressure in his mind, an invasive, cold presence probing his thoughts. Flashes of imagery, not his own, burst behind his eyes. The dizzying thrill of a stock market win, the satisfying weight of a gold bar, the obsequious bow of a rival businessman, the intoxicating power of commanding a boardroom. They were his uncle's memories, his triumphs offered to him like a grotesque buffet. The sensation was immediately followed by a deep, resonant longing, a hollow ache for that same power, that same respect. It was a seduction, a direct injection of addictive ambition into his psyche. The entity wasn't just threatening him, it was trying to recruit him, to awaken the same hunger that had doomed Arman. Simultaneously, the entity turned its attention, its gaze, fully onto Dr. Aulia. The pressure in the room shifted. The tempting images vanished from Rendra's mind, replaced by a sudden crushing weight of futility and despair. He saw Dr. Aulia stagger, her chanting faltering. Her face, illuminated by the lone candle, was a mask of sudden, profound exhaustion and doubt. The entity was attacking her not with fear, but with the crushing weight of intellectual arrogance. It projected a cold, logical certainty into her mind. You are a fool. You play with stories and symbols. This is a force of nature, older than your books, older than your theories. You cannot cleanse it. You cannot even understand it. Your life's work is a meaningless speck against eternity. Her arm, holding the candle, began to lower. Rendra watched, helpless, as the scholar's resolve crumbled under the psychic assault. He knew with a terrifying clarity that if she fell, he would be lost. The entity would break him, and he would willingly take up the mantle, becoming the next steward of this cursed wealth. The image of his own face, twisted with the same agony as his uncle's fleeting visage, flashed in his mind. It was this horrific premonition that finally shattered his paralysis. With a yell that was more desperation than courage, he grabbed the pouch of salt from the counter. He didn't know any mantras, he had no ritual. He had only a raw, defiant need to protect the one person who could help him. He lunged forward, tearing the pouch open, and hurled a handful of coarse salt directly at the entity's core. The salt crystals passed through the earthen form like sparks through smoke, but where they made contact, tiny points of brilliant white light flared for a nanosecond, and the entity let out a shriek of pure, unexpected pain, a sound that was entirely, humanly Arman's. The psychic pressure on Dr. Aulia vanished. She gasped, straightening up, her eyes refocusing with a fiery determination. The momentary distraction was all she needed. She raised the candle again, her voice ringing out, strong and clear, finishing the banishing chant. The entity, momentarily destabilized, seemed to dissolve backward into the shadows of the hallway, its form breaking apart into a cloud of black mist that retreated swiftly toward the basement, its rage a fading echo in the dark. The kitchen was theirs again, but the taste of its seduction and its despair lingered like a poison in the air. They had survived the gaze, but they had both felt its power. The cost of the next encounter would be higher. The silence that followed the entity's retreat was profound, broken only by their ragged breathing and the frantic hammering of Rendra's heart. The darkness in the kitchen was absolute, a tangible weight pressing in on the small, fragile globe of light from Dr. Aulia's candle. The sweet scent of the crushed flowers was now intertwined with the acrid smell of ozone and the cold, grave-like odor the entity had left in its wake. Dr. Alia slumped against the kitchen island, her face ashen. It doesn't just attack, she managed, her voice hoarse from chanting. It invades. It looks for your deepest vulnerabilities, ambition, doubt, pride, and amplifies them. It is a psychological weapon as much as a spiritual one. The lights flickered once, twice, and then surged back to life with a low hum. The sudden illumination was jarring, revealing a kitchen that looked utterly normal, save for the puddle of sanctified water on the floor and the scattered salt. The normalcy was a lie. The fear had been replaced by a cold, hard understanding. This thing was intelligent, adaptive, and knew them better than they knew themselves. Rendra's hands were still trembling. The memory of those injected feelings of power and ambition felt like a stain on his soul. It showed me his successes. It made me want it, he confessed, the shame thick in his voice. Dr. Alia nodded grimly, and it tried to make me believe my entire life's work was worthless. It is a master of manipulation. This changes our approach. We are not just fighting a ghost, we are fighting a sentient curse that has had years to weave itself into the very fabric of this place and everything connected to it. She pushed herself upright, a new urgency in her movements. We need to understand its entire network. The journal mentioned a Dukan. We must find him. And your aunt, sorry, her bitterness is not just a family matter. It is a potent source of negative energy the entity can use. Her anger fuels it, makes it stronger. They retreated to the study, the room feeling less like a sanctuary and more like a command center in a war zone. Dr. Alia spread her notes and Arman's journal on the desk, while Rendra scoured his uncle's old digital calendars and contacts for any mention of a shaman or trips to remote villages in central Java. Dr. Alia made a call. She spoke to a colleague in the anthropology department. Her conversation, a low, urgent stream of requests for cross-referencing village names, specific ritual terminology, and known practitioners of pre-Islamic Javanese mysticism. The academic network was now being deployed as an intelligence operation against the supernatural. Rendra's search was frustrating. Arman was meticulous about deleting old emails and keeping his personal life shrouded. But then he found it. A single cryptic calendar entry from over 12 years ago, simply titled T.H. Purwakurto, Consultation. The time block was for an entire weekend. There were no further details, no addresses. T.H.? he asked, pointing at the screen. Dr. Alia's eyes lit up. To Kong Hijao, perhaps? Or a name? Purwakarto is a gateway to the heartland of these beliefs. It's a start. It's more than we had. She immediately relayed the information to her colleague. The second front was more delicate. Rendra, with Dr. Alia's encouragement, had to call his Aunt Sari. He braced himself for her fury. The phone rang twice before she picked up, her voice icy. What do you want? Have you come to your senses about the house? Rendra took a deep breath. Aunt Sari, I'm not calling about the will. Something is wrong here. Seriously wrong. With the house. With what Uncle Arman was involved in. He spoke carefully, avoiding the supernatural, focusing on the feeling of being watched, the unnatural sounds, the cold spots. To his surprise, her anger didn't flare. Instead, there was a long silence, followed by a whisper that was laced with a fear he had never heard from her before. He always said the house was alive. He said it demanded things. I thought it was the stress, the pressure. You should get out, Rendra. Just leave. Don't try to understand it. The line went dead. Her fear was a confirmation. The entity's web of influence had even touched her. not with temptation, but with a warning she had been too afraid to fully comprehend. They had their leads. The battle was no longer confined to the villa. It had expanded into the past and into the fractured heart of the family itself. The line went dead, leaving a dial tone that buzzed like a trapped insect in the tense silence of the study. Rendra lowered the phone, staring at it. His aunt's voice, stripped of its usual vitriol and replaced by raw, unadulterated fear, was more terrifying than the entity's snarls. She knew. She had always known, on some level. Dr. Aulia watched him, her expression grave. "Her fear is a key," she said softly. "It is a crack in the entity's armor. It does not want its true nature known. It thrives on secrecy and the blind pursuit of its power. Your aunt's fear means she saw behind the curtain. We must speak to her, in person, now." Convincing Sari to return to the villa was an impossible task. Instead, they arranged to meet at a brightly lit, crowded shopping mall cafe in the city center, a place so aggressively normal it felt like another dimension. When Sari arrived, she looked like a different woman. The sharp, elegant business suit was replaced by a simple rumpled shirt, and the defiant anger in her eyes had been extinguished, replaced by a deep, weary anxiety. She flinched when a waiter dropped a tray, her hands trembling as she clucked her latte. She looked at Dr. Aulia with suspicion, but a nod from Rendra eased her tension slightly. "It started small," Sari began, her voice barely above a whisper, her eyes darting around the cafe as if afraid the walls themselves were listening. Little things he'd say, jokes about the earth favoring him. Then the rituals. He stopped trying to hide them from me. He'd come back from those trips to Java, changed, not happier but heavier, like he was carrying a weight no one could see. She described finding strange, dark soil on his clothes, soil that was ice cold to the touch even in the Jakarta heat. She spoke of the changes in the villa's land itself, how birds stopped singing in the garden, how the beautiful frangipani trees he'd planted withered and died within months, their roots black and rotten. The worst was the money, she said, a tear finally escaping down her cheek. It never felt real. It was like a ghost. Contracts would fall into his lap from rivals who suddenly had unfortunate accidents. He'd win bids by margins that were statistically impossible. We were rich, but we were prisoners. He became paranoid, convinced someone was going to steal his source. He said the house was the source. He said it needed to be fed with attention, with ambition, and then with something else. She looked directly at Rendra, her face pale. He started talking about legacy, about how the stewardship had to pass on. He said it had to be someone young with a strong will. He was grooming you, Rendra, long before he wrote that will. His death, it wasn't an ending. It was part of the plan, the final step to bind you. Dr. Aulia leaned forward. Sari, the Dukun, the man he visited in Purvakarta. Do you know anything? A name, a village? Sari frowned, digging through the painful memories. He never said a name, but there was a place. He brought back a souvenir once, a little wooden carving of a wayang character, a fierce one. It had a tag on it, Ukiran dari Desa Kalimerah, carving from Red River Village. She shuddered. He threw it away the next day, said it was asking too many questions. It was the break they needed. Desa Kalimerah. The name itself felt ominous. Dr. Aulia immediately began searching on her phone, cross-referencing the name with the region. Her face tightened. It exists, but it's not on any tourist map. It's a small, isolated community deep in the Dieng Plateau. The area is known for its potent spiritual energy, both good and ill. The conversation was over. Sari had given them everything she had,
and the act of sharing it seemed to have drained her completely. As they got up to leave, Sari grabbed Rendra's arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Don't try to fight it. Just run. Sell it all, give it away, but just run as far as you can." But as they walked away, Rendra knew running was no longer an option. The entity's web was too vast. It had ensnared his uncle, intimidated his aunt, and was now actively working to seduce him. It had a history, a point of origin. The path was clear. They had to go to the source. They had to find Desa Kalimerach and the Dukun who started it all. The battle in the villa was a symptom. The disease was festering in the high, misty mountains of Java. The academic and the heir were now going on a road trip into the heart of the darkness.
The decision to leave the villa was a tactical one, but it felt like a retreat. The entity's presence had become a constant, oppressive weight, a silent scream in the foundation of the house. Packing a few bags under its watchful, invisible gaze was one of the most unnerving experiences of Rendra's life. He felt a profound, irrational guilt, as if he were abandoning a post he had never asked to guard. Dr. Olia was methodical, filling her satchel with items from their ritual shopping trip, her notes, a digital recorder, and a high-resolution camera. "We are not running," she stated, her voice firm, as much for her own benefit as for his. "We are gathering intelligence. To fight an enemy, you must first understand its origin." They took Rendra's car, a sturdy SUV that felt like a moving fortress against the intangible threat they left behind. The journey out of Jakarta was a slow metamorphosis from steel and glass to lush green and ancient stone. The endless traffic jams and sprawling congestion gradually gave way to winding roads that snaked up into the highlands of central Java. The air grew cooler and thinner, carrying the rich scent of volcanic soil, clove cigarettes, and damp foliage. With every kilometer they put between themselves and the villa, the knot of tension in Rendra's chest loosened slightly. The constant, subconscious anticipation of a whisper or a scraping sound began to fade, replaced by the real, present sounds of the countryside. The buzz of motorbikes, the calls of street vendors, and the rhythmic chirping of cicadas. Dr. Olia spent much of the drive on her phone, coordinating with her academic network. She learned that Desa Kalimera, Red River Village, had a reputation amongst anthropologists and folklorists. It was not a place one simply visited. It was a community known for its deep, unwavering adherence to pre-Islamic Kawajan traditions, and it was notoriously closed off to outsiders. The name Red River supposedly came from the clay of the riverbanks, but local legends whispered it was from a long-ago conflict where the waters had run red with blood, staining the land with a powerful, violent energy. The Dukun they sought was likely an elder, a guardian of the village's oldest and most secret knowledge. Approaching him would require respect, patience, and a very good reason. By late afternoon, the picturesque rolling hills gave way to the more dramatic, mist-shrouded landscape of the Dieng Plateau. The air grew cold and damp. Gnarled trees, twisted by the wind, stood like sentinels along the road. They passed ancient Hindu temples, their moss-covered stones standing in silent testament to the area's deep spiritual history. Following vague directions from a farmer at a roadside stall, they turned off the main highway onto a narrow, poorly maintained track that could barely be called a road. It was riddled with potholes and lined on either side by dense, encroaching jungle. The SUV jolted and bounced, the outside world closing in around them. Finally, as the sun began to dip below the jagged volcanic peaks, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, they saw it. Desa Kalimera was nestled in a deep valley, a cluster of wooden and bamboo houses built along the banks of a river whose water did indeed have a faint, rusty red tint. A low, persistent mist clung to the rooftops and the surrounding forest, making the village seem like a place half in another world. There were no power lines, no satellite dishes. The only signs of modernity were a few solar panels and the motorbikes parked outside homes. As they drove slowly into the village, every activity seemed to stop. Men mending nets, women weaving on porches, children playing, all turned to look at the unfamiliar vehicle. Their expressions were not hostile, but deeply wary, watchful. The air here was not just cold, it was thick with a silence that felt ancient and knowing. They had found the source. Now they had to hope it would provide answers, not another, deeper layer of the curse. The villa felt a world away, but the entity's roots were here, buried deep in the red earth of this forgotten river.